Head voice is a term that gets thrown around a lot in the voice world, and there's often a lot of confusion about what it is and how to access it. So that's what we're talking about today. Welcome back to Singing Tips with LJD Studios, the space where we take difficult singing concepts and break them down so that you can actually understand them and implement them for better singing. I'm Laura, and today we're talking about head voice. Before we get too deep into it, make sure you like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so that you never miss a video. And if you haven't already, make sure you download my free guide, The 3-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer. In fact, you'll even get a few exercises on how to access your head voice in that. So make sure you click the link in the description to get that. And without further ado, what is head voice? How do you access it? And when will you use it? Before we get into it, I just want to put a little disclaimer out there, which is why I continue to call this head voice. I might get some hate for calling it head voice. And the reason is because in the voice teaching, voice science world, as we've gotten to know more about what's happening with the voice anatomically speaking, there's been this push to be more accurate with our language so that our language really matches what is happening physiologically. And as we break down this concept of head voice, what you'll find is that you're not singing in your head. That's not what's happening. And so people have pushed to get rid of that term. And I understand that. But I think that the experience that we have as singers and the sensations we feel in our bodies matters. And that sometimes it's helpful to match our language to the experience. And even if that means talking in a way that is not anatomically correct. What I think is the best is if we can understand what is happening physiologically and then talk about the sensations that that physiological action might produce. That's when I think we get the most powerful in our singing. So I'm going to continue to call it head voice because that matches the sensations that we experience, and you'll see why in a moment. But I also do want to break down what's actually happening when you're in head voice, just so there's no confusion. If you want a more in-depth conversation about registration in general, be sure to check out my video, Demystifying Vocal Registers. But this one, we're just going to focus on head voice, or what some people might call CT dominant or M1 or neutral. There's a lot of terms for it, and that's why the concept of registration is confusing. I'm calling it head voice, but let's talk about what actually happens. You have a couple of muscles in your larynx, and you got lots, but there are two that are really responsible for either lengthening and thinning your vocal cords or shortening and thickening them. The cricothyroid muscle lengthens and thins your vocal cords. This is going to help you access higher pitches and make lighter sounds. So when we sing in head voice, if you're not sure what head voice sounds like, we're going to get into that in a second, but it's generally a slightly lighter sound than chest voice. And so it uses the cricothyroid muscle as a slightly more dominant muscle than its counterpart, the thyroarytenoid muscle. For simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to the cricothyroid as the CT muscle and the thyroarytenoid muscle as the TA muscle. So when we sing in head voice, the CT muscle is just slightly more dominant than the TA muscle. Think about a pipe organ, right? Those higher pitches have skinnier pipes, right? So the same thing is true when you are singing higher notes and lighter tones. We want thinner folds, and that's the CT's job, okay? So when we're in head voice, we're working toward thinner, longer vocal cords, and the CT muscle needs to be a little bit more active in that than the TA muscle. Now, after all of that, you can probably see why sometimes I like to speak more in terms of the experience that we have, because you probably have no idea where your CT muscle is or how to engage it, right? But I do think it's kind of helpful to have a general idea of like what's going on anatomically speaking. So let's talk about what head voice sounds like first, because I think that helps us understand where the term head voice comes from. Head voice is a little separate from speech. I will probably do a separate video on chest voice as well. Chest voice is really related to our speaking voice. The distance from your speaking voice into your sung chest voice is not huge. The distance from your speaking voice to your head voice is a little bigger for most people. So head voice has a very hooty quality to it of like, ooh, ooh, ooh. And it feels a little bit lofty, and it feels like it is resonating more up here in your head. So one thing you can try is just speak and kind of try to identify, like, where do I feel the center of my speaking voice? For most people, it's going to feel a little bit more here, which is where that term chest voice comes from. Now, if you hoot like an owl, or you could do like a scary ghost sound and go, ooh, 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 and I do encourage using an ooh vowel for this, you'll feel, oh, that feels like it's more here, right? So if you go talk, hoot, talk, right? You can kind of feel that, okay, these don't resonate. They don't sit in the same exact place in my body. And so, in fact, hundreds of years ago, when people were teaching singing and we didn't have cameras that we could stick down your throat to see what was happening, people named head voice for the experience of it feeling like it was in their heads, right? So that's where that name comes from. Now, there is one sort of famous person who, in my mind, speaks a little bit more in head voice, and that was Julia Child, right? She kind of talked up here like this, right? And some people do speak that way. So it's not to say that no one speaks in a more head voice dominant position, but for the most part, most of us speak more in like a chest voice. And so head voice feels like this thing that's kind of separate from our normal speaking voice. And for that reason, it can be a little bit difficult to access. So the first thing I like to do when I'm teaching someone how to access their head voice is have them on an ooh vowel, hoot like an owl. So you should try that first and go ooh, ooh, ooh. And for many people, this works right away. You hear the sound, you can mimic it, and then you can go, oh yeah, I do sort of feel the sound up here. Or as I mentioned earlier, you could also do like a scary ghost sound of ooh, and try to take it lower or higher. The other thing you can try doing is sirening like a fire engine and going like woo, 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 woo. Regardless of which one you choose, I highly recommend using an ooh vowel. I'm not going to get too deep into this, but acoustically speaking, head voice likes smaller spaces. And an ooh vowel is a nice small space. But you want to make sure your ooh vowel is really ooh, really hooty. So you need to really round your lips a lot. Ooh, 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 and make it really round. It's not ooh, 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 right? Especially if you are a native English speaker, we tend to make it more ooh, 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 and that's not a pure vowel. So you really want to go to this pure ooh sound of ooh, ooh, and that's going to help pull you toward head voice. Now that's a very sort of like hear and repeat kind of approach, and that works for many people, but not for everyone. So let's try a different approach. Let's try one that's more kinesthetic. So when you speak, again, you might sense that you feel the center of your voice here. And if you're a little confused by that, I would actually try speaking very loudly, almost yelling, and you'll feel it more here. Like, hey, over there! Hey, hey, hey! Right? Then you'll really kind of get this sense of like, oh yeah, that's there, okay? So then you might try even sort of like humming or like, up on a higher pitch and start to feel the sense that like, okay, yeah, that feels like the sound has moved up here, right? And so once you've got that idea in your head of like the fact that sound can move throughout your body, resonance can move. And resonance is just like where we experience vibration, where we experience the center of the sound, like your center of gravity. And that can move all throughout the body. And there's not a right or a wrong thing. Like, right, this is the part that's sort of metaphor. This is the part that's more sensory based, and that can be different for different people, the way you feel and experience things in your body. But generally speaking, most people report this feeling of head voice feeling like they have resonance sort of up here and like the resonance moves here. To help that along, you can take your hands up here and make little circles next to your head, right? And imagine the sound being here. Aim it here, somewhere in your head. Doesn't matter where, just pick somewhere in your head to aim the sound. And as you can see, I'm kind of looking up. I'm almost like looking where I want to aim the sound. I'm going to go, ooh, ooh, ooh. And that can be another way to kind of help you move the sound up into your head. And of course, that's not what's happening, right? What you're really doing is engaging the CT muscle more. But because most of us don't know how to engage the CT muscle, we have to go about it in this sort of like backhanded, metaphorical, kinesthetic way. If neither of those approaches worked for you, don't dismay. A lot of us get really kind of locked down here in our chest voice because that's where we spend all of our time. Also, just tension in the body and stress and all of it. There's a lot of reasons why we might feel a little bit like locked and unable to get out of this position. So if those first two strategies didn't work for you, here are some slightly more vigorous ways to help you get unlocked. The first one I really love is just fold forward and touch your toes. I'm not going to do it because I got to rearrange my whole camera situation if I'm going to do that. But just bend your knees, fold forward, touch your toes, and like shake your head yes, shake it no, and then try making that same like ooh, ooh, ooh sound. Again, it's metaphor, but it's the way we feel it. When you're upside down, it starts to feel like the sound can kind of just fall into your head that way, okay? And what that's really doing is helping the larynx loosen up and move so that the vocal cords can lengthen and thin, but it really does feel like the sound kind of falls into your head. So that's one thing you can try. The other thing to know is that when we are in head voice, there's a little bit more movement of air through the vocal cords. So if you go back to kind of shouting like, hey, over there, and then let's say you are able to just kind of access this hooty sound of ooh, 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 you'll feel like it's lighter, like there's more air coming through. So if you're feeling locked, one thing you can do is try to just move a little bit more air through. And I might get some hate for this suggestion also, but sometimes I like to tell people to make a breathy sound, just so you can feel what it's like to get a little more air moving through the vocal cords. So you might go like, hoo, 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 and you might even like let your voice crack a little, dare I say it. You might put an H on the front, hoo, 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 and you can hear my voice kind of getting thrown into this more head voice position, right? Now that is by no means a finished sound, right? That doesn't sound great, but at least I can experience like what it's like to get out of my chest voice or out of my speaking voice or out of that TA dominant position and into more of this CT dominant position, into my head voice. So you can try getting really aggressive with it and just throwing a lot of air through the sound and see if that helps. Like I said, if you're really feeling locked, you even might have to try to make your voice crack. You could pair that with a forward fold, with bending over and touching your toes. Make sure your neck is really relaxed when you do this, and just whoo, whoo, try to get the air to just move through. And at the very least, what I hope you experience is this sense that your center of gravity for the sound moves up from where it was previously. And again, that's why I call it head voice. Okay, so now that you know how to access your head voice, when are you going to use it? I come from a classical background. I was an opera singer in a past life. I would call opera a head voice dominant style of singing. Now, we add weight to it with vibrato and a little more engagement from the TA muscle, especially down low. So it's not like head voice always has to be this really kind of like light thing, although it tends to be lighter than chest voice. But so if you wanted to sing in a more classical style, for sure, you're going to be using much more head voice in that than you would in some other styles of singing. My experience has been that not as many people are interested in singing opera these days. So when else might you use head voice? You're going to use head voice if you want to sing in a lighter, more folky style. Not to say you couldn't be in chest voice, but generally speaking, head voice is going to be a little lighter than chest voice, especially outside of the classical world where it doesn't have this big heavy vibrato on it. If you know what vibrato is, it's just that like ooh, kind of like spin or quiver in the sound. Ooh, that's vibrato versus ooh, which is a little more straight. All right, so when we're singing in folk or pop or rock, all those genres, vibrato is present, but not with the same consistency as in opera and not with the same weight as in opera. So when we are in head voice without this like heavy vibrato, it tends to be a much, much lighter sound. So if you want a lighter sound for whatever reason, head voice is going to be what you're probably going to want to use in that situation. And then lastly, you might use head voice just as a counter to chest voice, right? You might be in chest voice most of the time, and then for just a moment, you want to create a little break in the voice of like, ooh, ooh, ah. That you might want to just have a little break for stylistic reasons. So that's another reason why you might use head voices as a contrast to some of the other registers. There you have it, you guys. I hope that clears up any questions you might have had about what head voice is, why there's so many confusing ways of talking about it, and how to access it and when to use it. I will likely do one on chest voice and then probably one on the elusive mixed voice as well at some point. But again, if you want to kind of just understand this larger topic of registration on the whole, check out my video Demystifying Vocal Registers, linked in the description. Again, like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and make sure to download my free guide, The 3-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer. That link's in the description too. Thanks for joining and happy singing.